You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on November 19th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in. All right, friends. Well, we've been on quite a journey together, haven't we? We've come a long way in this series of conversations, processing God. And my hope in participating in this series has been to invite those of us who didn't really know what to say about God anymore into some new possibilities. Some of you may remember my story from the first week when I shared how my cancer journey disrupted my then current understanding of God. Great love, great suffering, and great loss do this to us, don't they? In those moments when we stand before a threshold, we always have one of two choices. We can move forward into some unforeseen territory, or we can step back and hunker down into what has been. Richard Rohr has said our last experience of God is often the biggest obstacle to the next experience of God. And so many of us here at Way Collective have stepped through that threshold, haven't we? But with any new step forward in our spiritual lives, we enter into this period of disarray or disorder while we search for new language to articulate this new and unknown landscape that we find ourselves in. And my heart in all of this has been to offer us some new language for talking about God, and also to help us have ears to hear when folks are entrenched in different registers of speaking about God. Mainly those two areas we've talked about, the metaphysical and the metaphorical. The reality is that metaphysical people often have a much harder time saying anything metaphorical and vice versa, right? But here's the secret. Philosophers like to talk in universals and big ideas that correlate with science and nature, while poets like to speak to the particulars through illuminative language and metaphor. But the mystics, they are the ones who teach us how to bring both together. Remember, the metaphorical speaks to the who and the why, and the metaphysical speaks to the when, where, what, and how. And many of us gravitate toward one register or the other when we talk about God. Some of us are kind of nerdy science people, and some of us are riding the wave of the poetic. We each probably have our own center of gravity, and my hope has been to uplift the other side a bit and show us that there's not only nothing to fear from either register, but that it's not even about getting God right, and it's much more about becoming playful again. Remember, we've talked about how many of us who have moved from an old concept of God into this new space have had to deconstruct the old, right? That's the popular term, deconstruction. But we've also been longing for something to say about the new, often without the language to really capture it. We spent a week looking at how those old claims don't work anymore and at our need for better and more moral concepts of God. I don't know if you remember the bad babysitter analogy, right? Then we explored the language games that people play around God and how we speak in various ways, how we use what are called cataphatic and apophatic postures to talk about God, and how this is always more theopoetics than it is theology. Then we spent a couple of weeks talking about an actual metaphysic called process theology, a constructive way of speaking about God's uncontrolling love in ways that are resonant with contemporary science and cosmology. And last week, we began bringing that metaphysic back into union with our contemplative Christian tradition, descending again into the register of our everyday experience and the mystical path. So tonight, my hope is to ensure that the barriers between metaphysics and metaphor become porous enough to begin dissolving. Because in my opinion, perhaps the best name we have for God is beauty. Now, I need to begin with a disclaimer of what beauty is not, right? The perspective we've inherited from the modern world is that beauty is what? In the eye of the beholder. A Jewish philosopher friend of mine, Sandy Labarsky, says that this means for modern people, beauty is no longer an objective quality in the world, but kind of a mental laminate that's layered onto nature by our experience and thought. So what she's saying is that when we remove beauty from being a product of nature and relegate it instead to your opinion or my opinion about what is beautiful, we lose something vital and fundamental. In fact, she goes so far as to say that beauty moves from cosmology, something inherent in the way things are in the cosmic order, to cosmetology. Now, the word cosmos is claimed by the beauty industry. A cosmetologist is somebody who puts your face in order, right? So here's what this means. When we talk about beauty, we mean the intrinsic quality of the universe that gives it inherent and inextricable value. Beauty is the most natural thing in the world, and nothing, not nihilism, not any philosophical or theological perspective, can strike it from nature. Beauty is the primary essence of the universe. So when I talk about God as beauty tonight, I don't mean that the concept of God you believe in now is simply more beautiful than other concepts you used to believe in, although that may be true. What I mean is that beauty is that which gives rise to concepts and rise to words, and more importantly, gives rise to and is the achievement of nature itself, imbuing it with an inherent sense of worth and meaning that has nothing to do with our analysis of it. And I can't stress this enough. So the most fundamental thing about you and me, and really about the whole cosmos, has nothing to do with how we look, but everything to do with how we look at it. Beauty doesn't have to do with how we make ourselves up. It has to do with our very makeup. Do you understand? Are you with me? And the only theological question is this: do we have eyes to see this beauty? It isn't, do you finally agree with Tim that process theology is just the best, right? It's, can we see beauty? Can we welcome it, even in the chaos? And can we let it do its slow work of transforming us into itself? Richard Rohr has also said that God loves things by becoming them. And it's this becoming that it's kind of where the inherent beauty is. Okay, so I think that ultimately this is what all mystics are aiming toward. And I believe it's the most meaningful register in which to talk about God. I remember I came on my friend Damon's podcast once, and we had a 2-hour wide-ranging conversation about God and many other topics. And he ended up titling the episode, "Beauty is My Religion," which is something I was quoted as having said during the interview. So what I meant by that wasn't that Epicureanism or hedonism is my religion. What I mean when I say that is that when it comes to God, beauty is the widest horizon we have to talk about God. Beauty is the wider horizon than even truth or goodness. It's the big container that gives birth to truth and goodness. It's more immediate in our experience than anything we could say or think about God. And in many ways, just as we talked about God's voice being silence a couple of weeks ago, silence is the first register of beauty. And music and language and art, all of these are creative overflows or expressions of this silent fact of things, that the entire universe has its genesis in beauty. So for me, beauty is where the metaphysical and the metaphorical melt into one another. They each have their place, but what they're reaching for in their own ways still falls short of the essence of beauty, even while they serve as containers for it. Beauty is the lens of the mystic that brings together the universal and the particular, like we talked about. Some of you may recall 2 falls ago when we had this series where we talked about pursuing beauty by learning to be attentive to beauty and to see God in our everyday lives. To see God is to see beauty, which is sort of a grand or transcendent value in the particular. This flower, this rock, this grain of sand, this tree, this person before me. And conversely, to witness the world with eyes that are attuned to see the radiance in all things, we see the beauty of God in everything and everywhere. So the poet Theodore Retke gives sort of a beautiful example of this sort of inner awakening and seeing in the final stanza of his poem, The Rose. And I want to read it for you now, just kind of as a contemplative invitation to see the way in which we're connected with beauty. And he writes this: "Near this rose, in this grove of sun-parched wind-warped madronas, among the half-dead trees, I came upon the true ease of myself, as if another man appeared out of the depths of my being. And I stood outside myself, beyond becoming and perishing, a something wholly other, as if I swayed out on the wildest wave alive, and yet was still. And I rejoiced in being what I was, in the lilac change, the wit reptilian calm, in the bird beyond the bough, the single one, with all the air to greet him as he flies, the dolphin rising from the darkening waves. And in this rose in the sea wind, rooted in stone, keeping the whole of light, gathering into itself both sound and silence, mine and the sea winds. Okay, so do you notice how he describes this experience of becoming one with nature? It's much like we talked about last week, as you and God mutually disappear as other than each other. We learn to rejoice in the beauty of what we are, just as everything else around us exists in its beauty, without a why, but only with an is. In essence, it's as if he sees himself as one expression in the continuum of nature, along with the flowers and the trees, the wind and the sea and the stone and the light. And in that, he rejoiced in being what he was, which was an expression of the very beauty of God. It's really stunning, isn't it? And the thing is, it's true not only of this poet, but of you and of me. So for process theologians like me, it all comes back to beauty. We might say something like, God is the manifold beauty of the world, in order to recognize that everything in existence is an instantiation and intimation of divine love and a realization of divine beauty. And in the same way, the poets and artists among us uplift beauty by giving it careful attention and exposing it through their mediums and what they make. Paintings and sculptures and poems become tiny thresholds themselves, cracks that let the light of beauty back into our hearts when we've lost our eyes to see it. So both philosophers and poets, each in their own way, reveal and expose God to us by unveiling beauty. And I hope that those of us who've been silenced by our confusion post certain forms of Christianity can see that beauty is where God can become radiant for us again. Because beauty isn't going anywhere, right? Beauty doesn't even need our description or our theology or our ideas. It just requires only the openness of our hearts to its radiance. And the same could be said of God. To meet the beloved only requires an openness of heart. God doesn't need proofs or the correct theory, only mystical openness to the world and its inherent glow. And I believe that if we can find our way back to awe, back to wonder, and back to surrender, we'll find God in the beauty all around us once again. So, as we close this series, my hope is that all the metaphysics and metaphors we've explored have simply widened our inner horizons and given us a language that's spacious enough for the God we're actually experiencing and encountering in the flashes of our own everyday attunement to beauty. We've named some really big ideas, we've questioned, we've deconstructed, we've rebuilt, but all of it has been in service of awakening to the beauty that's always been holding us. So carry this with you. If you can keep your eyes open to the radiance of the world, you'll never be far from God. Amen. All right, I have 3 contemplative questions for conversation. And here's the first question, which is the self question. Looking back over this series, where have you noticed your own understanding of God or yourself beginning to shift? Is there a moment, idea, or image that opened something in you or helped you to, sort of see beauty in your own life in a new way? And perhaps you can go into, do you resonate more as a philosopher, a poet, or a mystic? Number 2, the sacred question. Tonight we named God as beauty, the radiance running through all things. Where have you recently encountered this kind of beauty that felt sacred or holy to you? And what helped you recognize it as more than just a pleasant moment? And lastly, the society question. As you imagine carrying this awareness of beauty back into the world, how might it shape the way you see others, respond to suffering, or move through our shared life together? What feels possible or necessary when we begin seeing beauty everywhere, even in the most unlikely places? Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.